Hello and welcome back to my channel, Logically Literate. This is the fifth video in the 5-part series of making a Python web server using Flask and SQL Alchemy. In this video I want to talk about some other interfaces that could be used and potential changes to the code that we've written in the past couple of videos to make it a little bit better and cleaner. So to start off, instead of using a database for things like settings, if you need to have global settings for your application and not user-specific settings, you could use a flat file, like a JSON file, and have that stored right on your server. And when your application/server starts up, you just load the file in and read it into memory using the JSON library. And then when you change data in your settings, you can just write it to the file, and it'll always be on the server. Similar to the database, but in the use of SQL database is more so for multiple items. So for things like global settings, you won't need to have multiple versions of that. Next, you could look into using something like a Telegram chatbot, or there's many other chatbots out there, but something like a Telegram chatbot to send notifications to your phone. So what you can do with Telegram is you can actually get into a chat, a one-on-one chat, with a bot that you create, and then within your Python code you can talk to your Telegram API via the Telegram library and tell it to send messages to your bot, and your bot will spit out the messages on your phone, essentially making a push notification to your phone very quickly without having to build your own app and have your own push notification system. Although you could do that as well. Next, you could use something like an OBD2 library, or really any other hardware interfacing library, to view data from a specific device. So you could have a GPS that you're viewing data from. You could be viewing data from your OBD2 port on your car and showing it in your display. Really, the options there are endless. Any type of serial interface or USB interface or anything like that you can do with a Raspberry Pi, you can really use with this very nicely, and create a very good UI that can be seen either on a touchscreen that could be connected to your Raspberry Pi or on your phone through a router on the internet. In a later video, I can show you how to set up the over-the-internet version of Flask, but essentially all you're going to have to do is have a internet reachable IP address that Flask is listening to, or if you want to go over a local network, which is slightly easier than the internet, you can have Flask just connect to a local address. And then knowing that local address, you can contact that local address from a web browser just by typing it into your browser, and you'll see the web page. Similar to how in the examples before we typed in 127.0.0.1 and that pulled up :5000 and that pulled up the Flask web browser. You can do the same over your Wi-Fi, given your firewall is all set up properly on the device running the server. Lastly, I want to talk about Flask restplus quickly. This is great for using in an API-based server. So the difference I make between the API server and what we've been doing is we've been loading HTML files from our Flask server, and we've been using Jinja to modify the data in the Flask file or in the HTML files. Using Flask restplus, the server would be strictly an API server, so it would only have endpoints that take data and they return data. They wouldn't be returning HTML pages. So then what you could do is create a Node.js JavaScript server that has HTML and JavaScript pages, which is much easier to work with in terms of the visual components. You can run your Node.js server, possibly using AngularJS, which is what I'll probably show in a later video. And you can contact from that web page that you load up from that server, make contact to your API server that's running in Python. This allows for much cleaner HTML pages and much more support, I think, in libraries with the actual UI. Whereas when you use Python as the backend, separate from the UI, you have a lot of good support with processing libraries, potentially machine learning, hardware interfacing libraries, things of that nature that you really don't get when you're using Node.js as your backend. And to add to that, it's much cleaner to use JavaScript and HTML within a Node.js server versus loading it using Jinja. with a Python server. This is what a Flask restplus API endpoint file would look like. So you have an endpoint called /user, and it has a get method, a post method, and a delete method. You could also have a put method. Essentially what you do is you create a file based off of the Flask restplus API, and you create a mod for your blueprint, and then you add the mod to your API, giving you an API object, and then you use @api.route and to name your route. Putting that on top of a class will modify the entire class, given the classes of type resource from Flask restplus. Now, if you use any of the HTTP verbs like get, post, put, delete as function names, those functions will be ran when that verb type is used at this endpoint. So if we send a get request to /user, it'll hit this function. If we send a post request to /user, it will hit this endpoint. So if we're creating a new user, then we'd want to say post to user, and we would create a user, we'd pull its JSON out, so now we'd have user JSON, and then we would add it to our database, and we would tell the user that we added it to the database. Similarly, if we're deleting, you'd want to do a similar thing where you grab the user ID and then you query your database for it and delete it out of your database. Similarly, also with the get, you can query for a specific user's data or all users and return the user's data. I won't really show how to do any of this until a later video, but this just kind of will give you a good idea on how to kind of set it up. Again, with the mod, you'll want to take that and you'll want to take it and register the mod to your blueprint here, like we did with the public mod. And at that point, you'll be able to use the /user endpoint to access this functionality. So that's pretty much it for this video in this series. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them below, or send me a message and I'll try to get to that. If you'd like to see any more detail on any of the things that I've covered in this tutorial series, go ahead and leave me a message, and maybe I can make another video going into depth on certain things. But until next time, thanks for watching.